Welcome to Passages. I'm Michael Kigel. We're going to talk about a certain distinction that arises in Mount Sinai, that between morality considered from a revealed standpoint and from a natural standpoint. We have with us two distinguished scholars and rabbis, Rabbi and Professor David Novak, who holds the Schiff Chair of Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto, and Rabbi Hecht, who is the founding director of Nishma, and you can check out their website, nishma.org. So who's going to start us off on this discussion? What is the difference between natural law or natural morality and revealed?
I'll just throw out perhaps the opening perception is that there's a concept of morality, which basically, in the simplest terms, is the concept of do's and don'ts. What people should do or not do pursuant to some yardstick of proper behavior. And the question emerges is, where is the basis of this yardstick? So theoretically, Revelation presents the basis of the yardstick as something external. The voice of God tells us what is right and what is wrong. But when we talk in terms of natural morality, the world of reason and so forth, we basically believe that the starting point or our understanding of right and wrong emerges within ourselves, so some knowledge within ourselves. And the question is where that knowledge may come from. So
I guess we'd say it's nature, though, right? Ourselves, from the standpoint of the natural world, in a sense. No?
In a certain way. So the point is that once you present the concept of revelation, then one of the things you have to deal with is the challenge of revelation versus reason, or wait, I think we're framing it here, is the concept of a morality, a presentation of do's and don'ts that emerges from outside, from the voice of God, and how it connects to our understanding of do's and don'ts that we may have within ourselves. And
let me ask you this, is one contained within the other, like a subset within a set? Could we say that natural laws are contained within revealed laws, because ultimately God creates nature, and therefore all the natural laws have to somehow be contained within God's will in a revealed way? What do you think?
Well, I think you have to look at it somewhat with the way Rabbi Hecht presented it, a little bit differently, perhaps. I would look at it. It would seem that most people, or most thinkers, certainly in the West, and in fact in the East as well, had a notion that human beings have a distinct nature, a distinct character about them, that makes them different from the rest of creation, and also different from God. And that this nature is something which is to be respected, and therefore, based upon a kind of sanctity of human nature, certain claims are made upon us, not to kill other people, not to steal from them, to help them, what we would call a kind of natural morality, but natural meaning human nature. And I think that even those who accepted this notion of natural thought that somehow or other this human nature is a creation of God. And, you know, in the Jewish tradition, it's Tselem Elokim, and somehow it reflects the divine. I mean, the commands don't come directly from the voice of God, but somehow or other we see that behind these claims that other human beings make upon us that are legitimate is the God who created them this way. And there's a whole strand of the Jewish tradition that regards that this was the law that the Jewish people were living under, as well as other people, before Mount Sinai. And the question, of course, is, and this has always bothered a lot of religious thinkers, is, well, if we do have this natural law, so what do we need a revelation for? What do we need? And I think that we need revelation precisely because when it comes to the relationship with God, when it comes to what we call Ben Adam L'Makom, the only time that we know what God wants of us, and what God wants of us in terms of a covenant, a breed, is a kind of mutual relationship. That would have to come from revelation. That's not something that we would find in the world, so to speak.
But couldn't we see the world as if we saw the world as a direct manifestation of God's will, wouldn't we say that the world simply mediates that kind of relationship?
Well, it does mediate that relationship, but the fact is that we don't experience creation. I mean, creation is something that's kind of already there. And if, for example, we sense that there's a certain sanctity, the notion of the Tselem Elohim being the essence of human nature, the image of God, then the reason that we are respectful of others, or as Kant put it, treating them as ends in themselves, is that they reflect the divine. And our very attraction to fulfilling the just claims of other people gets us to at least desire to know the God who is behind all of this.
Scenes, yeah.
Because if you understand the notion of the image of God as not something that human beings have some qualities that, that God has, that's a big problem philosophically, but simply that every human being has the capacity for a relationship with God. Some people exercise it, some people don't exercise it. And that is something which is to be respected.
I agree with many points that Rabbi Novak is mentioning, and I think what's interesting though is that key question is that, and this is something that's asked by Jewish scholars and within the Jewish tradition, is if Sori Lamed Likra, as they say, if it's known from reason, what do I need a verse for? But in a much broader sense, in the sense is, why do I need revelation to declare a moral truth if I already know that moral truth? But what I think, and I'm going to throw this out as a suggestion, is that what I find when I look at Torah thought is that there are two sources that I can see in terms of how we have knowledge of good and evil. One is by focusing on the creation story and looking at the story of Adam and Eve, that you have the source for our knowledge of good and evil going within ourselves, and that comes from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. V'hayita ke'elokim, that you would be like an Elokim, and so forth, which ties into the concept of being in the divine image. So we're told that human beings have some knowledge between good and evil, which is a knowledge of moral knowledge, right from the point of creation. And yet Revelation comes forward and presents, in certain ways, a presentation that seems to, in many ways, parallel the knowledge of good and evil, but at some points in time presents concepts that seem to create some type of tension, almost a dialectic. And
with the natural
thing. And for example, when I look at the story of the binding of Isaac, in many ways, and I think this is supported by certain midrashic analysis, perhaps post facto, and a variety of statements, especially in terms of Sarah, our mother Sarah's response to the event, is that there is sometimes in Revelation a tension with natural morality.
Okay, we should take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes with more on this tension. Okay. Welcome back. We're talking about the different... No? Was that bad? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Did I miss the cue? No. Am I going by the music here or by the visual cue?
By me.
By you? So you'll point to me?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome back. We're talking about the difference between natural and revealed morality or law. I'll ask the question again. What is there to revealed law or morality that adds something to natural morality? Is it just icing on the cake? Is it some wonderful experience that is added to the bread and butter of morality, or is there actually something substantial there?
No, it's not icing on the cake. Clearly, from reason, we can understand that there are certain basic norms or certain basic rules in terms of human interaction that make sense, that none of us would want to live in a society that didn't.
Welcome back. We are talking about the difference and the togetherness of morality. I'm sorry. Those are not the words I wanted to use. I'm sorry, my fault. Can we just start one more time? Welcome back. We are talking about the difference between natural and revealed morality. And I'd like to throw the question out again. What is the value of revealed morality? Is it just icing on the cake, on top of a cake of natural morality, which is the real substance? Or is there actually something substantial to revealed morality itself?
No, there is something substantial to revealed morality. I mean, when it comes to certain basic norms to govern human interaction, we don't need revelation for that. And in fact, there's a famous passage in the Talmud that says about such laws as thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal is ilu lo nechtavu hayabedin de kotvan. In other words, if it hadn't been written, reason would have had us write it, as it were. So in that sense, we do not need morality. It's understandable why society endorses these rules, because if society didn't endorse these rules, nobody would have any loyalty to society, because clearly we'd all be at each other's throats. The question, however, of real morality is, why should I as an individual not kill my neighbor. That's not going to destroy society. And for example, you had interesting features. I think of during the Second World War in the United States, you had certain mafia figures who were breaking the law, and yet were working hard for the American war effort. Why? Because they were committed to the society as a whole, and they didn't think that what they were doing in terms of their operations were, and it's true. Right. Now, the question is, why should I as an individual not kill my neighbor or steal from my neighbor? Well, there it's because my neighbor is created, B'Tselem Elohim is created in the image of God, which means that somehow or other my neighbor has a capacity for a transcendence that is beyond just the physical presence in this world. But when it comes to natural morality, that's just something that's a hypothesis. That's something that I kind of posit, that it seems like a good reason. But I have absolutely no experience of it. What Revelation does is to basically, the God who is behind all of this announces himself. There's a wonderful midrash where Abraham, just before he's called by God, says, the world is in terrible shape. Is there anybody in charge here? And God says, yes, I'm in charge. So therefore, in that sense, I first of all learned the true foundation of what makes human beings the object of my respect and concern, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, the world doesn't tell us anything about God, I don't think. The world doesn't tell us anything about what God wants of us.
Can't we experience God even through reason, as you say? I mean, isn't reason, which is part of nature itself, has no sanctity, has no internal essential sanctity to it?
As a philosopher, I am very much influenced by Kant. I do not think that there are proofs of the existence of God. I do not think that nature tells us anything about God. I think that when we that when we talk about a God who's the creator of nature, it's because Revelation has told us that God has created nature.
I didn't mean as a proof. Okay, sorry.
I think there's a reality there. There's a reality of bias, if I can use the word bias. The point is that if you are someone who has encountered God through revelation, then you are going to look at the world differently. If you are someone who has not encountered God, you may not look at the world through the same eyes. In other words, I think that's very real in that regard. However, I think I just want to present a sort of a different view and get some comments on this. To me, I think there's a lot of arguments why you need revelation to support reason and so forth. But what I find is that in my perspective, I think that God has really given us two yardsticks of morality. One is the yardstick within ourselves, which I agree it comes from the same source. It comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, placed within ourselves through the knowledge of good and evil and through a certain sense of natural morality, the human nature that we have. And then God has thrown out or presented another yardstick, which is the revelational yardstick, which was given at a historical point in time, and for reasons beyond perhaps our discussion today, is not continuous in terms of God not always around saying, do this, don't do this, and so forth.
What do you mean it's not continuous?
What I mean by that is that we just can't go over to the mountain and ask God, what do I do in this case, or whatever. We're given a revelation that then is given over into man to, especially within Jewish thought, that it's in the hands of man to continue with. And what I find is that one yardstick by itself is open to be played with by the human being. Two yardsticks, in terms of dialectic, often can allow us to also can be played with to some extent, but allows us sometimes to maintain an attempt to try and find what the true answer is, what the true moral statement is. In other words,
you're saying we would be automata in either case. If it was all natural morality, then we'd be all obedient slaves to God's will.
I don't think it's automata. I think it's the opposite. We'd be able to play with it. In other words,
no. I'm saying if we had only one of those two, either one of those two would make us slaves to God's will.
You see people who are solely into revelational and completely downplay any aspect of natural morality or value to the will of the human being and analysis of morality, and saying, how can this be? That you see that you can go off on some tangents saying, well, because I believe this is what God said, it's totally okay. And on the other hand, you have people with reason who can use their reason to end up to any conclusion as well. The two yardsticks create some type of dialectic that hopefully will keep us in mind. And you see this in Jewish thought and so forth, where sometimes the question comes from within ourselves back on a presentation of revelational of halacha to say, wait a second, we have a kasha from ourselves, from our own perspective, something like that. Let's say Avram Avinu by Shofet Kol Haaretz V'Yaseh Mishpat, that Avram says, although the question is that came from natural morality or whatever, but the point is that I think that's a benefit of a dual process. Okay.
Why don't we divide it this way, because I think we're coming together on a number of points. Mm-hmm. I think it's a mistake to say reason, revelation. I think that the divide is between nature and revelation, or what I would call ordinary experience and extraordinary experience, about which people have reasoned. Most of our morality could easily come from ordinary experience of human interaction, which is not just discovering something within yourself, but that emerges out of people discursing what's needed for a decent society, for a decent way of human beings to live together. That's ordinary human experience. It's necessary but not sufficient. We sense that there's something about human beings that reflects something far beyond just ordinary human needs in the world. And this is why we desire for God to reveal himself. Now, God doesn't necessarily respond to our desire all the time, but apparently at one time he did. Mm-hmm. And therefore, this kind of extraordinary experience. Now, what it does is, since we have this direct experience of God at Mount Sinai, and that God chooses to reveal himself basically through the medium of law. Law understood as cosmic law. I mean, not just a bunch of rules, but I mean law by which God governs the universe. Now, that being the case, in fact, this is a famous discussion in the Talmud about this, could a group of people who were living under no law, having no notion of human nature, be in any position to accept the higher law of God? It seems to me there had to be some kind of preparation for it, or else it would have simply bounced off of them. And the classic example is Pharaoh. God talks to Moses, he listens. Pharaoh says, I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We should take a short break,
Yeah.
and we'll be back with that thought. Welcome back. We're talking about revealed law and natural law. And Rabbi Hecht, I want to give you a chance to respond to Rabbi Novak's idea.
I think Rabbi Novak is really onto something here, because in many ways we don't recognize, when we talk revelation, we're talking about the presentation of revelation through means that we now have to study. And I think that's a very important point to recognize, that we don't hear the voice of God. We get the voice of God in certain ways through our study, in certain ways similar to the way we study a secular book, although there are differences, obviously, because you're dealing with holy books and so forth. But the fact is really what we're doing is we're responding to a natural system when we study in the secular world, and we're responding to a divine system. But we're also bringing ourselves to the thing, and I really appreciate that presentation. What I'm saying, though, and I think that what perhaps I'm a bit more focused on is the tension between the two, in the sense that there's obviously tremendous amount of overlap, but I'm fascinated by the points of tension.
Give us a concrete example from today. Like not you mentioned Abraham, in Genesis 22. Just a simple. It doesn't have to like a prosaic example of that tension.
I think the classic one of today is the state of the aguna, the woman who halachically cannot remarry. And the point is that, and you see from the Talmud itself, almost saying that, obviously from natural morality, we are not. I don't want to use the word happy, but this is not a good state. This is unfair to the woman.
This is a woman waiting for her husband to give her a divorce.
Right.
Well,
she's beholden to
that example, I don't know, because that's an example that clearly a lot more could be done within the, because this is a question of justice. I mean, that is a case where actually the man who's in violation of Jewish law is benefiting, and the woman who's keeping Jewish law is being punished.
Exactly.
And there's a concept called the chota niskar, which means you don't reward the sinner.
Right.
And I think that one of the, shall we say, tragedies, if not embarrassments, of modern Jewish life, of those who live within the four cubits of the law, is that there are a lot more things that could be done to rectify the situation with plenty of tradition on its side, and not just simply throw up your hands and saying, what can we do?
My point is in many ways, I understand what's being presented, what David's saying here, but the thing that I'm trying to say is once you get the halachic process, is that the starting point is the tension, and then the whole halachic process is the attempt to try and merge the two. So in a certain way, the very fact that, hey, there's ways we can deal with it, that to me says something about the whole value of the system.
You're saying the impulse is natural morality, even though the solution may be worked out within the context
the starting
of halacha.
point is a statement. Now, we don't live in the starting point. The whole realm of halacha is to recognize that we are commanded to go beyond the starting point, but the starting point is A, and the other starting point is B, and they seem to be in conflict, and then that starts the ball rolling to get to the, now in many ways, and I think in our world today we're almost afraid to go to the natural morality side, and what you're saying, but the fact is that the halachic process is almost driven by the attempt to reconcile the two.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is that attempt to reconcile. I mean, if you look upon what we're calling natural morality as being the precondition for the Torah, that people could not have accepted revelation in good faith. They didn't have something
The learning never ends. Thank you for joining us on Passages. For your Kabbalistic jolt of the week, stay tuned for Messages, up next.